Chapter 182. Tears covered her pale face. She didn't know where to place her hands and gestured around. Her trembling fingers touched her tear-stained face. Qin-er, my Qin-er. If she was a man, she would be the first person to meet her. She would definitely treat her well, pamper her, and bring her to a faraway place. She wouldn't let her suffer so much humiliation and torture. From the beginning to the end, Imo Wushang's gaze towards her was cold, and without a shred of emotion. Lu Qingru had long known that he would be like this. If it was in the past, when she mentioned Gu Yueqin to him, no matter how cold and emotionless he was, there would still be struggle and regret on his face when she mentioned her name. But now, she suddenly smiled. It seems that the position of the youngest daughter of the Shun family in your heart has already far surpassed Qin-er. She walked towards the man step by step. Imo Wushang stood in the same place. As she walked closer, there was no expression on his handsome face. Lu Qingru stopped a step away from him. Since you can't be wholeheartedly devoted to Qin-er, why did you provoke her? If it wasn't for you, she wouldn't have died. Even she herself wasn't sure about the last sentence. Indeed, if it wasn't for Imo Wushang, Gu Yueqin wouldn't have died. But this time, it didn't mean that there wouldn't be a next time. Gu Yueqin would die sooner or later. The Gu family wouldn't let her go. Lu Qingru smiled weakly. What are you doing here? Don't hurt her. Her? Shen Yueji? Lu Qingru sneered. Looking at his eyes, her self-deprecation deepened. Imo Wushang, your heart changes really fast. You're already protecting her. She's ruined my plans time and again. Why can't I hurt her? The man's cold brows furrowed. It was a sign of anger. Others might be afraid, but Lu Qingru had nothing now. She only had herself left. Ever since Gu Yueqin died, she had been living a life worse than death. To her, life and death were all the same. Therefore, while everyone else was extremely afraid of Imo Wushang, she was the only one who was not afraid. She took the last step and walked in front of the man, meeting his cold and gloomy eyes. Imo Wushang, I also want you to have a taste of your beloved being killed by someone else. Bang! In just a moment, her thin and weak body was sent flying. Smashing in front of the dressing mirror, the bronze mirror shattered into pieces. Many of the broken mirror pieces pierced into her delicate flesh. She was in so much pain that her face scrunched up. Blood flowed all over the floor and dyed her thin clothes red. Even so, she still had a smile on her face. If you have the ability, why don't you kill me? Imo Wushang, aren't you very capable? Ruining my plans for that woman, you heartless men. Ha! After Qin-er's death, you casually loved her for a few days. Now that you have another woman, you have long thrown her to the back of your mind. You don't want to avenge her, but you can't stop me. Chapter 183. Why does everyone remember Gu Yueqin? Everyone praises her for being kind, beautiful, dignified, and generous. Everyone praises her for being the Empress of Feng Country and saying that she and the Emperor are a match made in heaven. Why can't they remember Qin-er? Can't they remember Qin-er's good side? Her vision became hazy again. Lu Qingru gripped the broken mirror fragment on the ground tightly. Blood flowed out of her palm like pearls. She didn't feel any pain. She just stared at the bright red blood that blurred her vision. I know the identity of any person in the pugilistic world who has an affair with you. The man's cold words made Lu Qingru's bent back instantly straighten. If you dare let them hurt Ji-er, I will make them disappear from this world forever. Why? Lu Qingru was completely furious. Imo Wushang, why can't I hurt her? You can abandon Qin-er for this woman? How can you face Qin-er by doing this? Lu Qingru climbed up from the ground in embarrassment and looked at him. Kill them? She thought it was ridiculous. Can you kill all the people in the pugilistic world? If you kill one today, I can find new people in the future. In front of him, she deliberately tore the clothes in front of her chest. She had just taken a bath and her clothes were thin. She didn't wear anything underneath. Almost immediately, her snow-white body was mottled with ambiguous marks, which entered the man's eyes. The man's gaze was cold. Even if it was a woman in front of him, there was no fluctuation in his dark eyes. It was as if the person in front of him was not a woman, but a dead person. Why are you pretending to be a gentleman? Imo Wushang lightly pursed his lips. His sharp lips looked like they were covered with a layer of snow. I will listen to you and not kill you. Take care of yourself. Imo Wushang. Seeing that he was about to leave, Lu Qingru quickly blocked in front of him. You really want to kill me? If you dare to have any ideas on Ji, I will kill you. I am taking revenge for Qin. So what? The man sneered. I won't stop you from taking revenge, but don't hurt my woman. Your woman? Lu Qingru almost laughed out loud. She looked at him mockingly. What about Qin? The man's handsome face was unaffected. Both. You're really infatuated. Imo Wushang walked past her, his sharp aura causing Lu Qingru's entire body to shiver. After he left, his cold words sent a chill down her spine, like a blade stabbing into her heart. I don't want to get involved in your affairs, but remember my warning. Empress. After Imo Wushang left, Lu Hui hurriedly came in. When she saw Lu Qingru covered in blood, tears instantly rolled down her face. He stepped forward to support her frail body. Her body was like a piece of white paper, thin and light. How was this the body of a human? Her heart ached as tears fell from her eyes. Nyang, why do you have to do this? Hui, you don't understand. Lu Qingru had used up all the strength in her body when she was arguing with Imo Wushang. She fell powerlessly into Lu Hui's arms. Chapter 184. Lu Qingru clenched her fists, her face pale, and smiled. Even if I can't win, what can I do? I only know that those who hurt Qin, they will pay the price. Even if I have to risk my life, I will make them regret it. Telling, forget about the Phoenix Palace first. Your Highness? Lu Hui frowned. Didn't you say first? Lu Qingru glanced at her. Compared to her, the person I want to deal with is that bitch Gu Yuan. Lu Hui looked at her with heartache. All these years, she had been by her Highness' side and watched her walk all the way. It would be a lie to say that she did not hate Gu Yuan in her heart. If it was not for Gu Yuan, her family's miss would not have become like this. The miss used to be such a proud, holy, and clean person. But now, she did not dare to think about it anymore, especially when she saw Lu Qingru's injuries. Your Highness, this servant will bandage your wounds first. Lu Qingru coughed heavily and brushed her hand away. I won't die. Your Highness. Lu Hui saw her push her away and walked into the inner hall in a sorry state. She shouted in a hoarse voice. The pain I suffered today, compared to Qin, is nothing. In the end, she closed her eyes helplessly. Lu Hui shook her head and left. Something big happened in the harem. The next day, Shun Yueji woke up and subconsciously touched the side of her body. She found that it was cold. Obviously, the man had left for a long time. Double happiness came in with a basin of water to help her freshen up. Your Highness, this servant has something to tell you next. She smiled sweetly. All her good mood was revealed on her face. Rubbing her aching eyebrows, Shin Yueji walked in front of her, took the towel and wiped her face. What is it? Your Highness must not have thought that this matter is related to Gu Yuan. Oh. Shin Yueji raised her eyebrows. After seeing Lu Qingru last night, she knew that something was going to happen today. Listening to her calm tone, as if she already knew. Your Highness, you already know? Know what? The Empress. In the past few days, all of the incidents have been directed at Xianghe Palace. Although your Majesty has the intention to suppress it, not everyone in the inner palace is like Bin Gong, who doesn't like to cause trouble. You only need to incite one or two people to leak a thing or two. In a place like the inner palace, one will spread to 10, 10 will spread to 100. No matter how great your Majesty's heirs are, it will be difficult to stop the mouths of the people in the inner palace. Your ladyship is right. In any case, the Gu family has been pushed to the heart of the struggle this time. When this servant went to the imperial kitchen, I heard all the servants in the imperial kitchen talking about the Empress and the former Empress. Many people changed sides, saying that the late Empress was framed by the Empress when she was alive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be haunting the Empress after death. There's also the matter of Tang Kai. After these two things happened, this servant also heard that the ministers in the imperial court wrote many memorials to the emperor. Although they didn't dare to speak recklessly in these memorials, this servant heard that Prime Minister Gu was so angry that his face turned green. Where's the emperor? Compared to the harem's every move, Shun Yueji wanted to know Feng Juqing's reaction the most. His Majesty? Chapter 185. Hearing this, Shun Yueji suddenly smiled. Shuangxi didn't know why she was smiling. Your Highness, sometimes, I feel that His Majesty loves her very much. But sometimes, I feel that he doesn't love her. Tell me, how much of His Majesty's love for Empress is true? How much is it fake? Shuangxi shook his head. I'm not sure either. When His Majesty and Your Highness are together, sometimes he is very protective of Your Highness in front of Empress. But once Your Highness makes a mistake, His Majesty will be partial to Empress. For example, Empress's mistake these 2 days. If it was Your Highness, His Majesty might have punished Your Highness. But it was Empress who His Majesty indulges. No matter how much His Majesty likes Empress, I feel that His Majesty's behavior and kindness to Empress are too strange. Really? It seems that I'm not the only one who thinks so. Your Highness, you think so too? Shuangxi was surprised. Shin Yueji glanced at him and nodded. Yes, Gu family's influence in the court cannot be underestimated. The reason why the emperor was able to become the emperor of the Feng Kingdom is because the Gu family risked their lives. But there was one thing that Shun Yueji was suspicious of. Feng Juqing had seen the Gu family's loyalty to Feng Juqing all these years. If it was as he guessed, Feng Juqing's kindness to Gu Yuan was all an act. If he could put on an act for Gu Yuan, was he also putting on an act for the Gu family? He had always trusted and respected his own people. Putting aside how much Gu Wei had sacrificed to help him, just the fact that he had handed over half of his military power to Gu Wei after he succeeded to the throne was enough to show how much he valued Gu Wei. Even the men of the Gu family were all put in important positions by him. It was hard to guess the heart of an emperor. After all, she and Feng Juqing had been married for 9 years. She had seen how well he treated the Gu family. If he really guarded against the Gu family, he wouldn't have given so much military power to Gu Wei and the Gu family's sons after he succeeded to the throne. Unless a bad guess arose from the bottom of her heart. She didn't know if this guess could be confirmed. According to her understanding of Feng Juqing over the years, did he start to have feelings for the Gu family recently? Except for this one thought. Shin Yueji couldn't figure out the reason behind Feng Juqing's actions. But what good would it do him if he lost the right-hand man of the Gu family? Compared to his loyalty to the Shin family, Shin Yueji could admit that her father and brother could really rebel against Feng Juqing for her sake. But the Gu family wouldn't. The Gu family had schemed for so many years to obtain power, splendor, wealth, and rank. Furthermore, the Gu clan had no ambition, they only had loyalty to Feng Juqing. Among the men of the Gu clan, there was no one who wanted to rebel and become the emperor. Who cares? We don't care what the emperor thinks about the empress. In any case, this servant only knows that Your Highness is doing well. That Gu Yuan wouldn't dare to cause trouble for Your Highness. Wasn't it just that her status was slightly higher than her ladyship? But this Feng Qi Palace, is the same palace as His Majesty's. It should be the Empress's palace. Didn't Your Highness notice that from the moment Your Highness entered the palace, His Majesty intentionally or unintentionally treated Your Highness's status as the Empress's? After Double Happiness's reminder, Shun Yueji seemed to understand. Chapter 186. Feng Juqing was the emperor, so he was accompanied by a phoenix. However, Gu Yuan's residence was just an auspicious palace without any meaning. This phoenix perch palace, on the other hand, had fallen into her hands. Thinking about the decorations in auspicious palace and her phoenix palace, they were the same size. Even the priceless decorations, Feng Juqing also ordered Gao Dazhong to secretly decorate them for her. The emperor is here. While she was thinking, Gao Dazhong's voice suddenly came from outside the hall. Shin Yueji was shocked. She did not expect Feng Juqing to come to her at this time. Logically speaking, shouldn't he have been troubled over the past few days? Because she knew he would not come, she was lazy and did not put on makeup. Even her hair was messy, except for washing her face. She lifted the hem of her dress and ran to the inner hall. Double Happiness, Help me block the people outside. I need to change my clothes." Before she finished, Double Happiness had knelt down. "Your Majesty." Shun Yueji was speechless. Knowing that her makeup was a disgrace to the sacred eyes, Shin Yueji stiffened her body and turned her back to the Emperor. She did not dare to look back. The Emperor's gaze swept over her body. She could feel his gaze sweeping over her. Feng Juqing's clear face was calm. He stared at her stiff back for a while and waved his hand to let the servants in the hall leave. Gao Dazhong and Double Happiness accepted the order and got up to leave. The Emperor walked behind her and frowned tiredly. "Did you just get up, Imperial Concubine?" I slept late last night." I will." Shin Yueji turned around and saluted the Emperor. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Feng Juqing did not help her up. He quietly stared at her half-bent body for a while. "Imperial Concubine? I'm not happy." Shin Yueji was speechless. She forced herself to lower her head. Shin Yueji's waist was almost sore, but she gritted her teeth and endured it. I don't know what Your Majesty is unhappy about. Did those officials in the court make Your Majesty angry? Have you heard about the rumor in the harem today? I just got up and haven't heard about it." Shun Yueji flatly denied it. The man sneered. "That Yahuan of yours has the same temperament as you." I'm afraid that Guifei did not wake up early. Her entire mind was focused on listening to what that Yahuan said about the inner palace. Shun Yueji's mouth twitched. She knew that the man wasn't angry. She curled her lips and said, just as I was getting excited, "Your Majesty's sudden visit really made this concubine panic." Feng Juqing helped her up. "Go put on some clothes. Be careful not to catch a cold." Shun Yueji was terrified and extremely flattered. She walked to the inner hall, put on some clothes and came out. The man sat on the beauty chair she had just sat on, holding a cup of tea in his slender hand. He stared at the steaming teacup for a long time, not drinking for a long time, not knowing what he was thinking. "Emperor." She walked up to the man and called out. Feng Juqing calmly returned to his senses and looked at her. "Imperial consort, do you have anything interesting to say to make me happy?" So the sudden visit was because he was unhappy? Shin Yueji was speechless. She stared at him with a sad face. "Your Majesty, aren't you making things difficult for me?" Feng Juqing raised his eyebrows. "How am I making things difficult for you? You're unhappy, but you can't make me unhappy. Besides, I'm afraid you found the wrong person to make you happy." Chapter 187. He probably felt that what she said made sense. But after listening to her first few words, Feng Juqing's eyes sank. "You seem to be very happy to see me unhappy?" "Of course not." Shun Yueji forced a smile. "I'm happy not because Your Majesty is unhappy, but I heard from eunuch Gao that Imperial Concubine Moon ran to Your Majesty to complain about me and frame me. Your Majesty chose to tolerate and trust me, and also let eunuch Gao pass a message to let me deal with Imperial Concubine Moon myself. I'm happy that Your Majesty protects me." His beautiful eyebrows raised, and the Emperor understood. "Imperial Concubine, do you think I'm protecting you? Isn't it?" Feng Juqing chuckled. "It's a fact that you have private contact with the regent, and what Imperial Concubine Moon said is the truth. I didn't listen to her, not because I believe you, but because I'm covering up for you. I admit that I have private contact with the regent, but Your Majesty, you know it, and I don't have that kind of feelings for the regent. Moreover, His Majesty is well aware of who the Prince Regent likes. Even if the Prince Regent came to this concubine's palace, he would definitely be looking for trouble. It would absolutely not be like what Imperial Concubine Moon said, framing this concubine and the Prince Regent." The man teased her. "You have a sharp tongue." He slowly closed his eyes. "Imperial Concubine." Shin Yueji got up from the ground. "Your Majesty, what can I do for you? I'm tired. Give me a shoulder massage." "Okay." Shin Yueji turned behind him with a fawning face. She could not be more diligent. A pair of new little claws rubbed his shoulders lightly yet heavily. The Emperor was displeased. "Imperial Concubine, you haven't eaten?" Shun Yueji answered eagerly. "I haven't eaten." Feng Juqing coughed and pulled a plate of pastries on the tea table. Shin Yueji thought that the man was considerate to give it to her. She was about to say thank you and take the pastries from him. Unexpectedly, the man turned his hand and slowly put the delicate pastries into his mouth. The man ate elegantly, chewing slowly. His crimson thin lips were more tempting than the pastries. Hence, Shin Yueji couldn't help but tighten her grip. She gnashed her teeth and glared at the man for a long time. Feng Juqing closed his eyes in satisfaction. That's more like it. Shin Yueji's hands were sore, and she didn't know how long she had been helping him. She looked sideways at the man's perfect side profile and closed her eyes. Her long eyelashes were neat and beautiful, and her crimson lips were soft and clean. There was a faint sound of breathing. Is he asleep? She walked from the man's back to his front and carefully looked at the man's exquisite and perfect face. It was as if a gentle breeze was caressing his face. His impeccable good looks could not conceal the fatigue on his face. She reached out her hand subconsciously. When he was tired, he would often do this. He would return to her side, and she would massage his brows and shoulders. He would speak to her gently, very gently, very gently. As he spoke, he would fall asleep. The way he fell asleep was very quiet and beautiful. It was more beautiful than a painting. But when she was about to touch the man's handsome face, Shin Yueji quickly withdrew her hand and took out a cloak from the inner hall and put it on him. Chapter 188. Feng Juqing slept for a long time. During this time, Shin Yueji raised her head and looked at him several times. She ate the pastries to stave off her hunger. Not long after, her stomach started growling again. She ordered double happiness to prepare the meal. She had planned to wait for Feng Juqing to wake up and eat together, but he was sleeping soundly and didn't look like he was going to wake up. So she finished eating by herself. It had been a long time since they had their lunch. Shin Yueji held her chin and looked at the man's handsome face. Did this guy not sleep for a day and a night? Your Highness, do you think His Majesty will wake up? Double Happiness, who was at the side, looked worried. Shin Yueji slapped her and glared at her. What nonsense are you talking about? No, I'm worried. Double Happiness felt wronged. The regent definitely didn't know that the emperor was here. The emperor had been busy dealing with government affairs these days and hadn't had a good night's sleep. If he slept until night and had dinner with the regent, at that time, the regent would appear and disappear mysteriously and bump into him again. What should she do? Shin Yueji stared at the man's gentle sleeping face for a long time, walked over and took off the cloak covering him. Perhaps it was because people would naturally feel cold when they were asleep. Not long after, she saw the man's long eyelashes move a few times. He was about to wake up. Shin Yueji quickly put the cloak on the man. Ah, scream! Her wrist was grabbed by the man, and as the man exerted force, Shin Yueji fell into his arms. The chaise longue was custom-made according to the degree of comfort, so it was different from other chairs. She was lying in Feng Juqing's arms, and the posture was extremely ambiguous. Feng Juqing didn't seem to expect this situation. He looked at the little woman's blushing face. Shin Yueji's eyes darted around, and her little paws patted the man's chest shyly. Your Majesty, what are you doing? You almost scared me to death. Feng Juqing pushed her away with a headache and rubbed his faintly aching eyebrows. You scared me to death, imperial concubine. What time is it? Shuang Shi, who was waiting at the side, hurriedly replied. Replying to your Majesty, it's about the time. 5 o'clock? The emperor murmured as he looked at the sulking little head at the side. We have slept for so long. Has imperial consort eaten? Shin Yueji wiped the residue from the corner of her mouth. No. Feng Juqing. The man smiled and reached out to her. Come here. Shin Yueji hesitated. Just now, His Majesty pushed this concubine away. Since imperial consort is so close to Zhen is afraid that imperial consort will suddenly have ill intentions towards Zhen. Shin Yueji stared at him and waved the cloak in her hand. This Chia was afraid that your Majesty would catch a cold, so I put a cloak on your Majesty, who knew that before the cloak could be put on, I would be disliked by your Majesty. Oh. His gaze fell on the cloak in her hands. Feng Juqing stood up. Gao Dazhong. Gao Dazhong heard the noise and came in. He said respectfully, Your Majesty, you're awake. Prepare the meal. Prepare the meal? Gao Dazhong was puzzled. He looked at Xin Yueji subconsciously and said, Didn't you just? His Majesty is hungry. Hurry up and tell the servants to prepare the meal. Eunuch Gao, Shuangxi, who was standing at the side, hurriedly answered. Gao Dazhong no longer hesitated. He responded respectfully and retreated. The emperor walked to the tea table and sat down. Chapter 189. Rub. Xin Yueji blushed. If you can gain some weight in the palace, it will be easier for me to explain to General Shan. Rub. Xin Yueji's face turned red. Feng Juqing pushed the cup of tea she poured to her. Don't forget to drink tea when you eat. Be careful not to choke. Your Majesty. Xin Yueji blushed and stared at him. I was wrong. Feng Juqing didn't even look at her. Instead, he casually replied, What's wrong? I shouldn't eat alone. I should wait for your Majesty to wake up and eat together. Or wake up your Majesty to eat together. Heh. The man chuckled. Grabbing the man's hand, Xin Yueji's heart thumped wildly. Your Majesty, this concubine saw that your Majesty was too tired and finally fell asleep. So this concubine didn't have the heart to wake your Majesty up. So this concubine ate first. I plan to wait until evening when your Majesty wakes up and then eat together. Feng Juqing pulled his hand out of the woman's arms, and the depression in his eyes deepened. Imperial concubine, there is a difference between men and women. You should behave yourself. She was choked by him countless times. No matter how good her temper was, Xin Yueji couldn't go against him again. She sat on the round chair across from him, looking straight at the man's gentle face, as if she was a dead pig not afraid of boiling water. Your Majesty, do you have a prejudice against me? The man's hand stopped and the tea spilled. He poured another cup and pushed it to Xin Yueji. Tell me. Your Majesty, why don't you deny it? Deny what? The emperor raised his eyebrows. Your Majesty, do you really have a prejudice against me? Say it. Xin Yueji was speechless. It seemed that he really had a prejudice against her. Xin Yueji cried. Your Majesty, I don't think I've offended you. Why do you treat me like this? Her words made the emperor puzzled. Feng Juqing pushed back the tea he had just poured for her and drank it himself. After drinking the tea, he looked at her. What is the meaning of this, Guifei? Xin Yueji pointed at the empty teacup in front of her. That's what I mean. The emperor clearly poured this tea for this Chenxia. Why is it that when this Chenxia wanted to drink it, he took it back and drank it himself? Feng Juqing twirled the teacup in his hand and couldn't help but smile. So, Imperial Consort wants to drink. I didn't know, so I'll pour another cup for Imperial Consort. She watched as he pushed the cup of tea towards her. Xin Yueji was afraid that he would change his mind at the last minute, so she quickly took it and drank it in one gulp. When she saw the man's calm and clear eyes, she suddenly revealed a shocked expression. Just as she was feeling puzzled, the scalding sensation in her mouth immediately assaulted her. She looked like she wanted to cry, but she didn't dare to be angry. He had thoroughly pleased the emperor. Feng Juqing walked behind her and patted her back lightly. Xin Yueji sobbed, looking extremely sullen. Your Majesty, you bullied this concubine. Feng Juqing sighed helplessly. When I was asleep, Imperial Consort took off my clothes and ate and drank behind my back. Isn't that the same as bullying me? This kind of behavior was treason in front of the emperor. Xin Yueji knew that he just said it to stop her, so she wasn't angry. She knew when to stop. She slowly wiped away the tears of grievance and sobbed. Chapter 190. Seeing the tears at the bottom of her eyes, Feng Juqing pinched a pearl-like tear to the pulp of his finger. His dark eyes were slightly dim as he wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. Don't cry. Xin Yueji went around to his back and put the cloak on him. Your Majesty, put on your clothes first. Be careful not to catch a cold. He helplessly stared at her for a while. The little woman sobbed as if she had suffered a great grievance. He did not know whether it was Feng Juqing's illusion or not. He had previously said to her that since she could not squeeze out tears, then she should not force herself to cry. This time, her performance was full of emotion, so that he could not distinguish the truth for a moment. The young emperor sighed and rubbed his aching eyebrows. How long has Gui Fei been in the palace? Shen Yueji counted with her fingers seriously. Answering your majesty, it has been more than a month. I heard from old General Shen that the longest time Gui Fei has been away from home is no more than 7 days. Shen Yueji did not understand and nodded. Feng Juqing looked at her with a smile. I want to go out of the palace. Is Gui Fei willing to follow? Your Majesty wants to go out of the palace? Shen Yueji was shocked. She looked around sneakily and then moved in front of the emperor. Your Majesty, do you think that the beauties in the palace are not worthy of your eyes? Are you going to go out and patrol the countrywomen? The emperor was shocked by her words and his brows turned black. Gui Fei, do you know what you are talking about? Shen Yueji cooperatively covered her mouth and said, Gui Fei, I was wrong. I should not have told the truth. He picked her up from the ground and looked into the man's eyes, which seemed to be smiling yet not smiling. Shen Yueji smiled. Your Majesty, I don't know. Gui Fei is the most beautiful woman in the harem. After going out of the palace, what kind of beauty can be compared with Gui Fei? Even a stupid person could understand the meaning of the emperor's words. Shen Yueji's pretty face turned red and she covered her little face. Your Majesty, where is the empress? Feng Juqing's eyes flashed and asked her to stand properly. The empress is injured and is also the head of the harem. It is not easy for her to go out of the palace with me. Even though he knew that wasn't what she meant, the man still cleverly avoided her question. Shen Yueji stared at the man for a while. When the emperor left the palace this time, he happened to pass by the general's residence. You can also send me back to the general's mansion? The answer was non-committal. Feng Juqing nodded his head. Zhen indeed have this intention. After Zhen returns from settling private matters, I will personally visit old General Shan's residence and bring the consort back to the palace. He did not understand why Feng Juqing wanted to bring him along. Moreover, from what he said, it seemed like he wanted to send her to the general's mansion before he left, and she would obediently wait for him to come back? Shen Yueji frowned. However, compared to staying in the palace, she wanted to return to the general's estate more. There weren't many rules there, and her father and mother treated her extremely well. She thought for a bit and then raised her head. No matter what the emperor's plan is, as long as it can help the emperor, this concubine is willing to do it. Since your Majesty wants to bring this concubine out of the palace, then your Majesty, when do we leave? His slender fingers landed on the tea table. Feng Juqing's pitch-black eyes flickered as he suppressed the glint in them. Tomorrow. Chapter 191. She thought that he wouldn't come to her Fengqi palace these days. There must be a purpose for his sudden visit today. Leaving the palace was a good thing for her. It would make it easier for her to bring Li Yingying into the palace. Similarly, if he wasn't in the palace, she would definitely take this opportunity to get rid of Gu Yuan after she had offended her several times. Just the identity of the empress was enough to suppress her. She couldn't resist it. Thinking of this, Shen Yueji suddenly raised her head and stared at the young emperor for a long time. Perhaps her gaze was so direct that it was hard for Feng Juqing to ignore it. What do you want to ask, imperial concubine? Your Majesty, you left me in the general's mansion. Was it because you were worried that after you left the palace, I wouldn't be able to cope in the harem alone? You were worried about me, so you wanted to send me back to the general's mansion first? After you came back, you would take me back? Hearing this, the man suddenly laughed out loud. The man's smile was gentle, elegant, and very charming. But when it fell into Shen Yueji's ears, it was full of infinite sarcasm. Imperial concubine has always thought so highly of yourself? Shen Yueji lowered her head in grievance. To tell you the truth, I have always thought highly of myself. Putting down the teacup in his hand, the emperor looked at her with a smile in his eyes. I had promised old General Shen that I would take care of you in the harem. Imperial concubine is different from the other concubines in the harem. I am afraid that after I leave the palace, Imperial concubine can't cope alone. Of course, I will send you back to the general's mansion first. After I come back, I will take you back. Shen Yueji's tone couldn't tell whether she was surprised or disappointed, so it was father's idea. Feng Juqing took a sip of tea slowly and said meaningfully, it was General Shen's idea to let me take care of you in the harem. It was my idea to take you out of the palace. Imperial concubine, don't be confused. These are two things. Your Majesty? Shin Yueji squinted at him. Are you flirting with me? Feng Juqing's hand paused. After a long time, he slowly brought the teacup to his mouth. He didn't answer or deny. Whether it was flirting or not, Feng Juqing could not be sure. All he knew was that he was comfortable with her, not bored, and that he was less playful with her. Even if he didn't want to admit it, when he was with her, he could let down his guard and fall asleep. His plump fingertips gently rubbed the teacup. The bursts of headache made the man frown again. His hand froze, and the teacup fell from his hand. Shin Yueji jumped in fright and looked at him. Emperor, are you all right? Feng Juqing smiled and patted the back of her hand as he looked at the beautiful face that was completely unfamiliar yet familiar to him. I'm fine. Perhaps it's really as Imperial Consort said. She's been handling official business for too long and is tired. Then, Your Majesty, do you want to go in and rest? Although this chaise longue is good, it is not as comfortable as a bed. Feng Juqing didn't turn her down. Perhaps it was because of the waves of headache that even he couldn't cope with, but he nodded and allowed her to support him into the inner hall. Your Majesty, why do you suddenly have a headache? Should I call an imperial doctor to take a look? Shin Yueji took off his boots for him and helped him to sit on the bed. Her bright eyes were full of worry. Feng Juqing waved his hand. No need. Maybe I'm tired these days. I'll be fine after a rest. Chapter 192. Shin Yueji looked at the man's pale but handsome face. For a moment, she felt that this man was very weak. His pale and powerless face laid there quietly. It was as if at this moment, he was no longer the monarch who ruled over the world, the mighty one. Instead, it was a man who had no one to rely on. He was lying in his small field, sleeping peacefully. She didn't dare to watch any longer. After 9 years of love, even though he had treated her like that, seeing him like this, Shin Yueji realized that the deepest part of her heart was still touched. Feng Juqing. She understood him the best. Apart from her, even Gu Yuan had never seen his weakest and most unbearable side. However, he had exposed the truth in front of her, and he had completely buried himself. Your Highness, has His Majesty fallen asleep again? Seeing her coming out, double happiness could not help but ask. Shin Yueji nodded.
Yes.
After saying that, she looked at Gao Dazhong in front of her. Eunuch Gao, I want to ask you something. Answer me truthfully. Your Highness, please ask away. Just now, Bin Gong saw that Your Majesty seemed to be having a headache. Is it because you're tired from handling official business these days? Headache? Gao Dazhong's face turned pale. Realizing that something was wrong, Shin Yueji frowned and looked at him. Tell me honestly. Gao Dazhong looked troubled. His Majesty is already asleep. Just tell this matter to Bin Gong honestly. Bin Gong won't tell anyone else. After the late Empress passed away, the Emperor would have headaches from time to time when he was dealing with official business. Sometimes, it would be over after a while, but sometimes, the Emperor would vomit blood. Shin Yueji was shocked. So serious? Has His Majesty ever called for an imperial physician? His Majesty didn't allow me to summon an imperial physician. He said he was just tired and it wasn't serious. I understand. The thin lips moved, but Shin Yueji didn't say anything in the end. He waved his hand at Gao Dazhong. There's no need to prepare dinner. Let's do it later. The Emperor is resting. Yes, Your Highness. Shin Yueji didn't understand why Gao Dazhong would add late Empress in front of his name. Was he reminding her that the late Empress had passed away, and the Emperor was also sad and missing her? Was it longing? While thinking, Shin Yueji returned to the inner hall. She slowly sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the man's peerlessly handsome face. Feng Juqing, you actually don't love me at all. You feel guilty, right? Actually, you know that I wouldn't betray you. But in order to gain the trust of the Gu family and make them more loyal to you, you didn't listen to my explanation and ordered me to be executed, right? Thinking of this, Shin Yueji felt that she was ridiculous. She was still wondering why her man didn't believe her and why he didn't listen to her explanation. They had been together for 9 years, and she had seen how well he treated her. When she went out with him, they encountered an assassin. That fatal arrow was shot at her, and he blocked it for her without hesitation. The carriage fell off the cliff. She was in the carriage, following the horse that had gone out of control towards the cliff. He was seriously injured, but despite the pain all over his body, he still held onto her tightly. She wanted him to let go. She could die, but with his identity, she would not allow him to die. She could still remember when his eyes had turned red. He did not say anything, but he used his actions to prove to her that he would not let go of her. Even if he died, he would not let go of her. Chapter 193. The poisoned blood overflowed from his shoulder and almost dyed her clothes red. He ignored the danger of losing his hand and pulled her up from the bottom of the cliff. She still remembered the moment she came up. He held her tightly in his arms. At that moment, he was afraid that she would leave him. The feeling of surviving a disaster and regaining a lost treasure. He said, don't be afraid. I'm here. It's okay. It's okay. He ignored the rushing blood on his body and was still thinking of comforting her. The past scenes, from knowing each other and loving each other. Compared with being respectful to each other, she always felt that Feng Juqing loved her. Even if it was just for show, no prince could be the only mistress of the mansion. He didn't even have a concubine, not to mention a side concubine. It was true that she had been faithful to the end, and she was the only one. He would hold her late at night and during the day. No matter how busy he was, he would take time to accompany her. He knew that she suffered a lot when she was in the Prime Minister's mansion. Knowing that she couldn't read, he taught her. He taught her to write his name. He taught her to write her husband. He taught her to play the piano and paint. He drew her eyebrows and tied up her hair. At the palace banquet, there were young ladies from aristocratic families and other princes and concubines who made trouble for her. Even if he couldn't get any benefits, he still protected her behind him without hesitation. When a young lady from an aristocratic family liked him and expressed her love to him, he would hold her hand and look at her affectionately. Only you in this life. She was framed. The former emperor was furious and ordered her to be beaten 50 times. He didn't say a word or beg for mercy. At the moment when the fierce board fell, he used his body to protect her in his arms and took the beating for her. A lot. Every scene was unforgettable for Shan Yueji. But at the same time, the more affectionate he was in the past, the more annoyed she was now. He said that no one was clean in the battle of the royal family. Only my Qin was the cleanest. He said, I'll protect you. I won't let you come to any harm for the rest of my life. Too many words, too many promises, but in the end, what did he get in return? Feng Juqing, in your heart, in the end, I can't compare to your authority and status. He was the man she had loved for 9 years. Now, he was the high and mighty emperor of the world. To him, she was nothing more than a fleeting cloud. The woman he loved the most was hidden in the secret chamber. At the end of the day, he only felt guilt towards himself. That was right. How could the woman in snow-white clothes in the secret room be compared to her, a dirty woman who had already been humiliated by others? The girl that Feng Juqing liked must be clean, kind, pure, and untainted by even a speck of dust. Feng Juqing, she opened her lips and murmured softly. Her hand slowly touched her belly. Do you still remember here? Our 3-month-old child, your own flesh and blood, was taken out by you while we were still alive. If we talk about the past, even if you really schemed against me, your love and protection for me, and the hardships you suffered for me are all real. I won't argue with you anymore, but the child, our child. Do you know how much I look forward to the birth of a child who has yet to see this world? The man's exquisite face didn't seem to be sleeping well. Looking at him, Shun Yueji's eyes were filled with deep hatred. She was afraid that if she continued to look at him, she wouldn't be able to control herself and kill him. She stood up decisively. Chapter 194. She was shocked. She turned around and looked at the man who was murmuring in his sleep. Exion. Endless sarcasm spread from the bottom of her heart. Shin Yueji shook off his hand. The man's pale, sleeping face seemed to be in endless pain. Her hand was grabbed by the man again. The man was very strong. and his grip on her was very tight. It was a kind of imprisonment, as though she would suddenly disappear. Xian, he murmured over and over again, calling her softly. Shin Yueji's stiff body was pressed under his body. The familiar smell of the man filled her nose. This was the gentleness that she was familiar with and didn't hate. It was still the same endless lingering and deep love as in the past. His gentle lips brushed her neck and kissed her neck almost out of control. That familiar sweet smell, make the man forget to go back, constantly smelling all the smell that belongs to her body. He was greedy, greedy beyond measure. Shin Yueji could feel that he was out of control. His hands were wantonly on her body. This was the Feng Juqing that she had never seen before. It was so out of control that it was strange. She used all her strength to push the man away. The man was deep in his sleep, and his pale face was filled with endless pain. Shin Yueji tidied up her messy clothes and got off the bed in a bit of a mess. Xian, the man seemed to be in more pain when his arms were empty. He reached out to grab her. Shin Yueji gave her hand to him. The man grabbed her hand and seemed to feel at ease. The pain on his face also dissipated a lot. Shin Yueji tucked the quilt for him thoughtfully. When the man completely calmed down, she stepped out. She stepped out of the inner hall. Well, this is the trusted maid of the imperial concubine's sister. How can you discipline her? Still not admitting your mistake? Suddenly there was a dispute in the hall. She frowned immediately. She tidied up her messy clothes and prepared to go out. Hearing this familiar voice that was like the chirping of an oriole, the knot in Shin Yueji's heart dissipated. She immediately smiled and even put down her hand that was tidying up her messy clothes. Instead, she revealed a large area of snow-white skin on her neck. The dense and ambiguous marks on it were instantly eye-catching. She hurriedly picked up the broken tea set that was scattered all over the ground. Empress, forgive me. It was Newbie who was blind and bumped into Empress. This time, it was indeed her negligence. She didn't expect Guiyuan to suddenly visit, causing her to bump into her when she rushed out. When Shuangxi made a mistake, he would admit it, so his attitude was especially good. But in Shun Yueji's eyes, it was obvious that double happiness had been bullied. Especially her delicate face, there was a clear palm print. She walked out slowly and asked, "What's going on?" "Yo, Sister Empress." As if she had just seen Guiyuan, she hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Sister Empress." Guiyuan smiled slightly and was about to help her up, but inadvertently saw the dense kiss marks on her snow-white neck. Although the collar that was deliberately pulled open could not be hidden from her eyes, the kiss marks on her neck, and her messy hair, the redness on her face. The smile on Guiyuan's face instantly froze. Chapter 195. Guiyuan's hands were clenched so tightly that they bled. Her eyes were filled with intense jealousy. She had been with the Emperor for so long, but the best he had done to her was to hug her. He had never kissed her. What method did Shin Yueji use to be able to make the Emperor like this? The densely packed kiss marks were still lingering in her mind, and it was difficult for them to dissipate. She knew the Emperor had lost control. The faint smell of blood and the prickling sensation brought Guiyuan back to her senses. She smiled faintly. "Looks like what I said before was right. With Imperial Consort's beauty, it's only a matter of time before you gain favor in the harem." Shin Yueji pursed her lips shyly. What is Empress Jejie saying? Once the wound on Jejie's face heals, there will be no younger sister left. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Shuangxi's swollen face. Her fair fingers caressed her crimson lips. "I wonder how Big Sis Empress face is doing?" "Oh, that's right. Why did Big Sister Empress suddenly come here today? This concubine didn't even have time to freshen up. I've made a fool of myself in front of Elder Sister Empress." Guiyuan chuckled lightly. "Thank you for your concern, Sister Guifei. This consort's wound has healed very quickly, and it's all thanks to Sister Guifei's snow jade lotus. This consort's face has already regrown, and I believe it won't be long before the wound on my face is completely healed." Speaking of this, Guiyuan took a step forward and held her hand. During the days that Bin Gong was injured, Shun Guifei had taken care of Bin Gong a lot. Taking advantage of the fact that Bin Gong's face injuries are getting better today, Bin Gong specially came over personally to thank younger sister Gui Fei. That's good. Shen Yueji let out a long breath and pulled her hand out of Imo Tianga's palm without a trace. She smiled embarrassedly and said, Sister Empress is too serious. Sister is injured. How could I not care? This is what I should do. Sister Empress is treating me like an outsider. Double Happiness, why are you still standing there? Hurry up and invite Empress Sister in to pour tea for Her Majesty. Yes, Your Highness. Shuangshi covered the obvious palm on his face. When he passed by Shen Yueji, his long and narrow eyes narrowed. Wait, Your Highness? Shuangshi stopped in front of her. After hearing her words, he stood there in confusion. Shen Yueji held her chin. What's wrong with your face? Don't tell me you accidentally bumped into something when you went out? Oh, it's like this. Just as Double Happiness was about to speak, Gu Yuan smiled apologetically. Nanny Gu, this servant is here. I told you to apologize to Miss Double Happiness, so why are you still standing there? Yes, Your Highness. The middle-aged servant girl called Nurse Gu obediently walked out from behind her and looked at Shuangshi. Her attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. Miss Shuangshi, this old servant was impatient and hit you. I hope Miss Shuangshi won't take it to heart. Double Happiness did not want to cause trouble for Shen Yueji. After all, the power of the Gu family was not to be trifled with. She waved her hand and said, Granny Gu. She was too impatient and hit her? Chapter 196. Gu Yuan's apologetic smile became a little sharper. She stared coldly at Nanny Gu beside her. Didn't you hear what Imperial Concubine said? Nanny Gu didn't dare to hesitate. With a respectful expression, she apologized to Shuangshi again. Miss Shuangshi, I always do things according to the rules, and I'm fair in rewards and punishments. There is nothing between Empress Jejia and Empress Jejia. Logically speaking, today, I should also give face to Empress Jejia. If Shuangshi is beaten, then so be it. I shouldn't alienate Empress Jejia because of two servants. But her crimson lips were pressed into a straight line. This Chia still doesn't know what mistake Shuangshi has made to make Gu Mama not care about the benevolence Bin Gong gave to the Empress in the past and directly hit her. Gu Yuan pursed her lips and didn't speak. Nanny Gu's hard face was tight, and her eyes were full of disdain and contempt, including when she apologized to Shuangshi just now. Her arrogance and disdain couldn't escape Shen Yueji's eyes. I'm a person who cares about the feelings of servants. Shuangshi has been with me for so long. Now she was beaten for no reason and swallowed her anger. If she made a mistake and Sister Empress taught her a lesson for me, it's still reasonable. But if she didn't make a mistake and was suddenly beaten... Speaking of this, she looked at Nanny Gu in front of her with a disdainful face, twitched her lips, and smiled. Nanny Gu, you look unfamiliar. I don't seem to have seen you before. Nanny Gu bowed. In reply to Imperial Concubine Shen, I was just sent to the palace by Madam to serve Her Majesty. The Madam in her mouth naturally referred to Morong Yun. Shen Yueji's expression didn't change. I see. Shuangshi, tell me, how did you offend Her Majesty just now? Shuangshi knelt on the ground with a sorrowful face. I saw the tea on the table was cold, and I was going to change the pot. I didn't expect Her Majesty to suddenly visit, and I didn't let anyone report. I walked abruptly and almost hit Her Majesty. As he spoke, Shuangshi clenched his fists and purposely made a few small cuts with his sharp nails. When Shen Yueji realized her words, she opened her hand to take a look. Only then did she discover that her pure white palm had long been dyed red with a pool of red blood. The blood continued to flow from the wound, looking ghastly and frightening. It was obvious that the wounds were caused by a broken tea set. Gu Yuan and Granny Gu's expressions changed when they saw this. However, one could imagine that Shen Yueji's expression was not good. Looking at Shuangshi's blood-stained white palms, a trace of heartache flashed across her eyes. In the end, she steeled herself and endured it. She forced a smile. So you accidentally bumped into Empress Sister. Empress Sister's body is so delicate. How could you bump into her? Nanny Gu wanted to protect the Empress, so it was reasonable for her to hit you. Bin Gong didn't expect Shuangshi's hand to be so serious. It was Bin Gong's negligence. Nanny Gu just entered the palace and didn't know the rules of the palace. What's more, she didn't know that imperial concubine Shun had helped Bin Gong the day before yesterday. Gu Yuan argued for Granny Gu. She saw that Shin Yueji's gaze was not on her at all. She kept saying that it was reasonable, but the heartache for Shuang Shi in her eyes was obvious. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Granny Gu, I'm here. Chapter 197. Your Highness? Nanny Gu looked at her with some confusion and immediately understood what she meant. She rolled her dark eyes disdainfully a few times, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed to Shin Yueji. Your Highness, all the mistakes are my fault. I didn't understand the rules of the palace. She fiercely swung her hand and gave herself 2 tight slaps. She didn't stop until her 2 faces, which were covered in powder, were bright red. Miss Shuangxi, I was wrong before. These 2 slaps are my apology to you. I hope you can be magnanimous and don't lower yourself to my level. Receiving the hint from Her Highness's eyes, Shuangxi smiled and quickly helped Nanny Gu up from the ground. Nanny Gu is older than me. It was my carelessness that caused such trouble. My Highness and the Empress are like sisters. We can't make the relationship stiff because of our little things. Nanny Gu, in fact, it was my fault first. I don't mean to blame you. Nanny, you don't have to do this. Sister is weak and can't stand for a long time. Come in and sit. Shin Yueji smiled and took the initiative to invite her in. Gu Yuan smiled faintly. If she hadn't let Nanny Gu come, Shin Yueji would not have let her enter the main hall of Fengqi Palace as she wished. She entered the hall calmly and walked to the high place to sit. Her status was above Shin Yueji, so she should sit on the top. Shin Yueji didn't say much. She quietly found a seat on the top and sat down. After sitting down gracefully, Gu Yuan waved her hand and said, Nanny Gu? Yes, Your Highness. Nanny Gu raised her hand, and the crisp sound of slapping resounded in the hall. 7 or 8 palace maids and eunuchs outside the hall came in with a few plates of jewelry. The plates were wrapped in red cloth, but there were some pearls and jadeite exposed. They looked delicate and bright. How could they be bad if they came from a place like Shangha Palace? Shin Yueji looked puzzled. Empress sister, what is this? Gu Yuan smiled and ordered people to lift the red cloth. Jewelry, jade bracelets, necklaces, earrings, all of them were inlaid with priceless pearls. These are all bestowed by the emperor to Bin Gong previously. There are too many types, and when younger consort sister was in the residence, she was also deeply loved by old General Shun, and what she lacked the most were these rare treasures. Our auspicious Harmony Palace has a lot of these accessories. I really don't know which ones Imperial Consort Mei likes, so I brought some of these over to gift to Imperial Consort Mei. Shin Yueji's small face showed that she was flattered. Empress, you can't do that. Younger sister doesn't have this fortune. These are all bestowed to you by His Majesty himself. If you were to give them to this concubine, I'm afraid that His Majesty will not be happy when he finds out. These are merely worldly possessions and Bin Gong is indebted to Consort Shin. So how could the emperor not be happy? Gu Yuan smiled slightly. Imperial consort should not decline. You've helped Bin Gong so much and almost suffered grievances at Bin Gong's hands. These days, Bin Gong has been feeling apologetic. Take these accessories as Bin Gong's apology to Imperial consort. Seeing that she had spoken to this point, Shin Yueji could not decline anymore and nodded her head. Since it's like this concubine will not say anything else. Double happiness. Yes, Your Highness. I heard that Hua Yang is currently working in Imperial Consort's Phoenix Perching Palace. Chapter 198. Shin Yueji nodded. Not only Hua Yang, but also the palace maids and eunuchs brought out of the secret chamber. After their injuries are healed, I plan to recruit them to Fengqi Palace. Hearing this, the smile on Gu Yuan's face had another meaning. Sister Imperial Concubine is kind to them, especially the servants in the harem. Imperial Concubine is kind to them for free. Imperial Concubine can rest assured to use such people. Shin Yueji chuckled. That's right. Speaking of which, these people used to be Empress sister's servants in auspicious Harmony Palace. I asked His Majesty's opinion, but I didn't get sister's consent. Since sister is here today, these servants are nimble and do things quickly. If it weren't for what happened to Tang Kai, I would like to take them back to Auspicious Harmony Palace. I'm afraid that even if I want to use them now, they won't be willing to follow me." Shen Yueji laughed. "Sister is magnanimous, gentle, and kind. It's their blessing to follow sister. It's not like what you said." Gu Yuan looked at her with a smile. "After their injuries are healed, it's good to stay in Fengqi Palace. I hope Imperial Concubine can treat them well. After all, I'm really sorry for this matter. Empress, rest assured, I will be more considerate to them." After the two of them talked for a while, the hall fell into silence again. During the tea, the two had a tacit understanding. Shen Yueji could feel that her gaze seemed to fall on her body. That sharp, needle-like gaze fell on her white neck. On her half-covered snow-white neck, there were dense kiss marks. Just looking at it, people couldn't help but remember the turbulence between her and the emperor. Squinting at Gu Yuan's forbearing appearance, Shen Yueji laughed in her heart. No one would be able to accept seeing the man they loved dote on another woman. Sometimes, she felt that Gu Yuan was very pitiful. Did she think too well of Feng Jiuqing, or did she think that in Feng Jiuqing's heart, her position was far higher than the country in power? "I heard that before Sister Imperial Concubine entered the palace, you had a relationship with the Prince Regent?" Her sudden mention of this made her think of Zhangsun Wuyue, whose tongue was cut off. She was now a little dignified in this harem, domineering, ruthless. Those who didn't know the truth would think that she was abusing her position to avenge a personal grudge, deliberately destroying Zhangsun Wuyue. Those who knew the truth felt that she had punished Zhangsun Wuyue too severely, destroying her way out. Shen Yueji wiped the water from the corner of her mouth and lightly said, "Imperial Concubine Moon ran to His Majesty's imperial study and publicly spread rumors that this concubine had an affair with the regent. She also said that the regent stayed at this concubine's place day and night." When it came to the funny part, Shen Yueji covered her mouth and laughed. "A few days ago, the regent wanted to kill me. How could the regent change his opinion of me so quickly in just a few days? Moreover, Sister Empress knows about the relationship between the Prince Regent and the former Empress. He has been depressed recently. I didn't get his favor before I entered the palace, so how could I have an affair with him after he entered the palace?" Gu Yuan nodded. Imperial Concubine Moon, because of a personal grudge, spread false rumors and tried to destroy the Imperial Concubine's innocence. She should be severely punished. Otherwise, if the concubines follow suit, it won't be a good sign. Chapter 199. Seeing that Gu Yuan mentioned the emperor at every turn, Gu Yuan didn't know whether she was deliberately showing off or not. Gu Yuan's identity was there, so it was not good to lose her temper. But Nanny Gu couldn't bear to see her master always being rejected by Shen Yueji. She smiled coldly and secretly reminded Gu Yuan of her identity. "Imperial Concubine has done a favor for my master first. Not only is the Empress grateful to Imperial Concubine, but even the Emperor takes care of Imperial Concubine. But," she deliberately prolonged her voice, "Imperial Concubine should know that the Emperor doesn't like concubines to make trouble. Most concubines who can be selected to enter the palace are polite, gentle, and kind. But Imperial Concubine directly ordered people to cut off Concubine Moon's tongue and set off a rain of blood in the harem." The Emperor turned a blind eye to Imperial Concubine's kindness to the Empress, but Imperial Concubine's action is too inappropriate. This consort's actions are righteous and my actions are straightforward. When I was at the estate, Father taught this consort that if someone dares to act atrociously over your head, then you must bully them back twice as much. Otherwise, others will think that you're easy to bully. This person doesn't learn from his mistakes and will instead become even worse in the future. Shen Yueji rested an arm on the edge of the chair and looked at Gu Momo's overbearing face. Momo also knows that Imperial Consort, you didn't just run to the Emperor to complain about this consort. This is related to this consort's innocence. Could it be that Gu Momo has forgotten how the late Empress died? A venomous woman who wanted to take my life. The corners of her lips curled up, but I only ordered someone to cut her tongue. Compared to her saying that she cares about my sisterhood, Between me and her, who is the one who cares about who? Shinyueji's words were well-founded and made Nanigu speechless. Yes, she knew how important a woman's chastity was in the harem. If the emperor listened to Zhangsun Wuyue's words, Shinyueji would end up like the former empress. But she only cut off Zhangsun Wuyue's tongue in return and had no other means to deal with her. In comparison, Shinyueji was too kind. Nanigu wanted to use this as a pretext to remind Shinyueji of propriety. Compared with the empress, she was nothing. Now that she had been outmaneuvered, her face turned pale and green. She couldn't utter another word for a long time. But Shinyueji gave a cold laugh, not wanting to let her go like this. Gu-mama said that the emperor doesn't like imperial concubines to cause trouble. The imperial concubines that are chosen to enter the palace all know etiquette, distinguish right from wrong, and are gentle and kind. Can I take it that Nanny Gu is implying that I'm cruel and merciless? Arrogant because you're favored? Gu Yuan's expression abruptly changed as she scolded. Nanny Gu. Nanny Gu was scared and hurriedly knelt on the ground. Imperial concubine. I didn't mean that. I just what? Shinyueji sneered at her. If you weren't my empress sister's servant, do you think you could still stand here and say such insolent words to me? Being reprimanded, Nanny Gu didn't dare to say a word, for fear that she would make more mistakes. Gu Yuan knew that Shinyueji had a glib tongue. She had seen this mouth of hers in the past few days. Chapter 200. There was a fire in her heart, but she smiled calmly. Please don't be offended, Imperial concubine Shen. It's the first time that Nanny Gu entered the palace. Relying on my identity, she forgot the rules in the harem and lost her sense of propriety. When I go back, I will punish her well and let her remember it. There's a good saying that it's good to know one's mistakes and correct them. I believe that Nanny Gu will understand the rules of the harem thoroughly under the guidance of Empress Sister in the future. Shinyueji took a sip of tea and sneered. She even satirized her master. How could Gu Yuan not understand the meaning of her words? Although Shinyueji's identity was lower than hers, she had seen the identity given by the emperor in the layout of Fengqi Palace since she came in. Everything was equal to her. If she deliberately made trouble for Shinyueji, she was afraid that the emperor would be dissatisfied. Her snow-white fingertips trembled slightly. She covered her mouth and coughed lightly. Her gaze fell on her pair of white hands. There were still some imperfections on them, but they were fair and tender flesh could be seen growing. It seems that the injury on Guifei Mimi's hand has almost healed in the past few days. I didn't expect the Yulu ointment to be so useful. I thought it would take a few more days like elder sister. I didn't expect it to recover so quickly. Shinyueji looked up and down at her jade-like fingers in surprise. This pair of hands was like her charming face. No matter how you looked at it, her whole body exuded charming vitality. Elder sister, the injury was on my hands, but not my face. Elder sister, you must pay more attention in the future. This face is very important to a woman. Gu Yuan chuckled. I know. She stroked her loose phoenix robe. Seeing this, Nanny Gu beside her hurriedly came forward to help her up. As Gu Yuan got up, Shinyueji also stood up. I suddenly feel unwell. Imperial concubine sister, sorry to bother you. Elder sister is weak. It's too much for you to come to the palace to thank me in person. Since elder sister is not feeling well, you should go back quickly. She felt that Gu Yuan's eyes always fell on her neck intentionally or unintentionally, and Shinyueji seemed to unintentionally pull down the collar on her neck so that she could see it clearly. A look of hatred and jealousy flashed across her bright eyes. How could this escape Shinyueji's eyes? During this period of silence, Gu Yuan spent most of her time looking at her neck, seeing the dense and intimate marks on it. Even if she wanted to endure it, the ferocious expression on her face was a constant reminder of her master's current mood. Gu Yuan also knew that she had lost her composure. She forced herself to withdraw her gaze from Shinyueji's neck. But after all, she was still young and full of vigor. When she thought about how the man she loved the most was hypocritical and disdainful of touching her, and how he cared so much about Shinyueji, a woman who had only entered the palace for a month or so, she couldn't help but think. She had worked so hard for so long, but all she got in return was a hug from him. But what she got in return was his everything. How could she not be angry and jealous? A fire was burning in his heart. Gu Yuan closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was supported by Nanny Gu as they left Phoenix Perch Palace. Chapter 201. Xin Yueji's gaze fell on the jade fan in Shuangxi's hands. Xin Yueji would never forget this jade fan. This was a treasure gifted by an envoy from another country. Speaking of the jade fan's similarity, it was undoubtedly warm in winter and cool in summer. In winter, the wind from the jade fan was hot. In summer, the wind from the jade fan was cool. This jade fan was Gu Yuan's most precious treasure. Xin Yueji had never thought that she would give it to her. It seemed that she had done her best to express her gratitude. She looked up and down at the jade fan and said meaningfully, "Did she smear something on it?" Shuangxi's face was filled with anger. "Your Highness, this is the most unpresentable medicine in the Jianghu." "Oh?" The wind that flashes out from the jade shaking fan carries a fragrant scent. When a person is tired, they can sleep with this fragrance. However, at the same time, this kind of fragrance can also cover up the other smells on the fan. Hearing this, Xin Yueji brought the jade fan to her nose and sniffed it. There was indeed a lingering fragrance. What medicine in the Jianghu? Dispersing sickness. Xin Yueji frowned. What medicine is this? This kind of medicine is silent and won't cause any problems for a short period of time. However, this is also the danger of this medicine. If your Highness uses this jade fan to fan yourself every day, after a long time, the fragrance of the sickness powder will enter your Highness' body and cause your Highness to unknowingly fall ill. This illness will cause your Highness' body to become weak, powerless, and pale. Even the imperial physicians in the palace are helpless. Over time, her ladyship will lose her color and lose her life in this serious illness. Xin Yueji was slightly shocked. Gu Yuan could not wait to get rid of her now. This was really a good method. If she really used this jade fan, she would fall sick and pass away like she wanted. No one would be able to trace it back to her. Gu Yuan is in the palace. How can she be connected to the Jianghu? Suddenly, she thought of the third young master of the Gu family who had entered the palace. It was him? Apart from this person, Xin Yueji couldn't think of a second person who could silently send the Jianghu's sickness and joy to Gu Yuan. This Gu Yuan is really vicious and shameless. Your ladyship has helped her so many times, yet she still wants to harm your ladyship. This Gu family is really double happiness. Xin Yueji glanced at her and gestured for her to enter the inner hall. Thinking of the emperor lying inside, Shuangxi curled her lips. Her face was full of dissatisfaction, but her voice was still low. This should be heard by the emperor. Let the emperor take a good look at how the Gu family treats their benefactor so viciously. Xin Yueji smiled. So what if I know? Do you think he would punish Gu Yuan if he knew? When she said this, she suddenly smiled. Compared to this consort, the emperor has to deal with official affairs every day. This consort feels that he is more suitable to use this jade shaking fan than this consort. Hearing the meaning behind her words, Shuangxi was shocked. Your Highness, are you trying to murder the emperor? Seeing the expression on her face, Xin Yueji frowned. Didn't you say that if it is discovered in time, it will be fine? The emperor is a dragon, so he will be fine in just a few days. But your Highness, Shuangxi couldn't ignore the ambiguous marks on Xin Yueji's neck. She secretly sighed in her heart. This woman's heart was really unfathomable. Just a moment ago, her ladyship was in deep trouble with the emperor, but as soon as she got out of bed, she turned her back on him. Chapter 202. Feng Juqing was awakened by a slight breeze. A familiar fragrance entered his nose. His handsome eyebrows furrowed, and the next moment, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Xin Yueji's smiling face, holding a fan in front of him. The breeze blew across his jade-like face. The emerald fan looked a little familiar to him. He was stunned for a moment and said, "Emerald fan?" He lifted the brocade quilt and sat up, rubbing the space between his eyebrows. So your Majesty still recognizes this emerald fan? While your Majesty was asleep, older sister Empress came once, saying that she was here to thank this concubine. She also gave this concubine many gifts. Your Majesty, look. Older sister Empress even gave this concubine this jade fan. I heard that this emerald fan is a treasure given by the envoy of another country, and Your Majesty gave it to Empress. I didn't expect Sister Empress to be so generous to give it to me. Feng Juqing looked at her, and there seemed to be something else in his gentle eyes. But after a while, he looked away and said tentatively, "When I was asleep, did I talk in my sleep?" Shun Yueji blinked, and suddenly, her pretty face suddenly blushed. Seeing her blushing pretty face, Feng Juqing's dark eyes overflowed with a layer of fierceness, but he quickly hid it quietly. Shun Yueji sat on the edge of the bed, holding the emerald fan, and said shyly, "When Your Majesty was asleep, you didn't talk in your sleep, but when I was covering Your Majesty with the quilt, Your Majesty suddenly took my hand." There was a strange look in his dark eyes. Feng Juqing looked at her face, which seemed to want to say something. Although he was in a deep sleep, he was still conscious. That familiar fragrance swirled around him, that familiar touch, that familiar taste. He reached out his hand, and when he was about to touch the woman's neck, she seemed to be frightened and jumped away. She looked at him with a frightened face. "Your Majesty." Her jumping away made the emperor unhappy. "Come here." "What are you doing?" Shin Yueji looked at him with a sad face, but she didn't go over. Even when Feng Juqing was about to lash out at her, she did not know where she found the courage to not go. "Your Majesty is such a bully. When you were asleep, you almost tainted this concubine's innocence. Now that you're awake, do you want to taint this concubine again?" She covered her red face and complained angrily. Two black lines appeared on the man's fair forehead. "Imperial consort, have you forgotten your own identity?" "I didn't forget." Shin Yueji looked back at him fiercely, "But the emperor doesn't like this concubine." Without giving her a chance to speak, Shin Yueji felt a strong force forcing her to walk towards the edge of the bed. She was getting closer and closer to the man, and she was shocked. The man reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Suddenly, the world spun around her. Her body softened in the man's embrace as he brought her to the bed and pressed her under his body. The collar in front of the neck was gently picked up by the man with his hand. The dense kiss marks on it numbed the man's eyes. His eyes fell on the ambiguous marks, and he didn't come to his senses for a long time. The emotions that flashed across his handsome face were too complicated. There was entanglement, pain, and regret. He actually lost control of her. He always thought that it was a dream. In the dream, her figure appeared countless times. In the dream, he lost control of himself and tangled with her. He held her in his arms and poured out his love and longing for her. She leaned into his arms obediently, her face full of shyness. Chapter 203. Every time, the naked and irrepressible love in his dreams would be empty when he woke up. There was no one beside him except for him. He didn't expect that he would lose control over Shun Yueji. Even when he was with Gu Yuan, she would put some drugs in the incense to make him delirious in order to get him. Sometimes, he would fall into a trance and expose the things that he longed for the most. Sometimes, he would see Gu Yuan's face match with Gu Yueqin's. But at the same time, he would always come back to his senses. Gu Yueqin was Gu Yueqin. There was only one in this world, and no one could replace her. But when he thought that he had the same dream again, he didn't separate Shin Yueji and Gu Yueqin, but treated her as her. Thinking of this, his head started to hurt violently again. Shin Yueji saw him like this and slipped out of his arms. She stood up and tidied up her messy clothes. "Your Majesty, what's wrong? Can I get the imperial physician to take a look?" The woman's worried words made Feng Juqing slowly come back to his senses. He raised his head and looked at the face that was completely unfamiliar to Gu Yueqin. He suddenly closed his eyes. "It's okay. It's okay." Shin Yueji looked away embarrassedly. "After all, with my beauty, it's normal for your Majesty to lose control." There was a long silence. Shun Yueji covered her mouth awkwardly. Your Majesty, I'm just talking nonsense. Please don't take it seriously." Feng Juqing lifted his eyes to look at her and suddenly smiled. This woman was pretty and eloquent. She had a pair of sparkling eyes that were like crystal grapes. She had a delicate face, an exquisite cherry mouth, and a slender figure. Every part of her was a demon in the mortal world. Even Gu Yuan couldn't compare to such a woman. Any normal man in this world would be bewitched by her if they saw her. But Feng Juqing's eyes gradually dimmed. But she was the daughter of a general. He touched the position of his heart. "Your Majesty?" He smiled slightly. The beauty of an imperial concubine can easily make people lose control. His words caused Shun Yueji's face, which had just regained its rosy color, to turn red again. She embarrassedly covered her face and stomped her feet. "Your Majesty, this concubine has ordered Shuangxi to prepare dinner for you. It's getting late. You should quickly eat. After you finish eating, you can return to the imperial study to deal with official business." Feng Juqing nodded. Seeing this, Shun Yueji retreated first. As he watched her leave, he stroked his brows with his long fingers and rubbed them gently. When he opened his eyes again, the gentleness in the man's eyes was like a sharp blade, and his handsome face was fierce and cold. In a trance, he seemed to see that familiar pale face looking back at him from not far away. The young emperor's eyes were locked on her, and he did not blink. He reached out to her and watched the woman's disappointed and tearful face slowly disappear into the distance. Feng Juqing's gentle lips curled into an arc as the longing in his eyes faded away. When he stood up again, his posture was strong and his figure was tall and straight. There was no trace of his previous weak and pale appearance. Xian the young emperor stood with his hands behind his back and his fingertips gently twirled. His deep eyes were full of shrewd calculations. "Compared to you, the daughter of the Shen family is much smarter." Chapter 204. When Feng Juqing came out of the inner hall, he saw Shin Yueji's small figure busy helping him prepare the food. He frowned and walked towards her. "Let Gao Dazhong handle these things." Shin Yueji looked back and smiled. "What are you talking about, Your Majesty? It's rare for Your Majesty to have a meal here, so of course I have to serve Your Majesty personally." She knew that men didn't like sweet food, so she mixed sweet and salty dishes together so that men wouldn't get too sweet. Perhaps the man still had matters to deal with, so he left after eating a few mouthfuls of food. Shin Yueji respectfully saw him off. When his dragon carriage disappeared at the end of the corner of Feng Qi Palace, she let out a sigh of relief. Shuangxi was busy preparing the food for her. "Your Highness, why did you suddenly sigh?" Shin Yueji dismissed the servants of Feng Qi Palace and looked at him. "Tomorrow, the emperor will take me out of the palace." "That's a good thing." Shuangxi was stunned and then smiled. "The emperor is really good to Your Highness. He doesn't forget to take you out of the palace." Shin Yueji shook her head. "You're wrong. The emperor doesn't forget to take me out of the palace. He sends me back to the general's mansion first and then leaves." Moreover, Feng Juqing's kindness was somewhat fake. Perhaps when they were alone, she was a little lost in it. But after calming down, she knew that this had always been his way of doing things. "Is that so?" Shuangxi's eyes flickered a few times. "Your Highness, the emperor is the ruler of a country. If there is something outside the palace that needs his attention, he can send someone to deal with it. Why does he have to personally?" "How would I know? It's not appropriate for me to ask him." "But why does he have to take Your Highness with him? He probably doesn't feel comfortable leaving me alone in the palace. If Guyuan does something to me, I won't be able to deal with it." Seeing the mischievous smile on Shuangxi's face, her eyes deliberately flashed and she hurriedly said, "Don't think too much in that little head of yours. The reason why the emperor treats Bin Gong so well is because of father." Thinking of Shun Yueji sighed in her heart. Sometimes, she really envied herself for having a family that loved and cared for her so much. Just for the sake of the general, Shuangxi winked at her, and his gaze fell on the kiss mark on her neck. She blushed and quickly pulled up her collar. She scolded in a low voice, "Girl, why are you getting more and more out of line?" Shuangxi curled her lips disapprovingly. "Your Highness, what do you take this servant for?" "This servant is worried about Your Highness. The Prince Regent will be here soon." If the Prince Regent sees the hickey on your neck, Shin Yueji was shocked by Shuangxi's words. She subconsciously pulled up her collar. I would have forgotten if you hadn't mentioned it. Imo Wuxiang was extremely petty on this matter. If he were to see the kiss marks left by Feng Juqing on his neck, her hands subconsciously touched her neck. The reason she came to the palace was to become Feng Juqing's favored concubine and seek revenge on him. She had lost her virginity in her previous life, so she was already his wife. Therefore, she did not think that she needed to keep her chastity until the end. She had never imagined that there would be another Imo Wuxiang in her world, and that she would continue to have contact with him. What does it have to do with him? She pursed her lips and said coldly, I am His Majesty's woman. It's only a matter of time before I sleep with him. The Prince Regent and I are just on a whim. Even so, she stood up and said, order someone to prepare water for me. I want to take a bath. Your Highness, you haven't eaten much. Chapter 205. In the warm bathing pool, Shun Yueji immersed herself in the water. The clear water was half submerged in her neck, and the clean, warm water was sprinkled with petals. The hot air mixed with the rich fragrance of flowers, clouding her vision. She stretched out her boneless fingers, gently pinched a petal, and brought it to her nose to smell. Vaguely, she seemed to recall something. After Feng Juqing came back from the palace, he was not in a good mood, and his gentle face showed a rare tiredness. When she saw this, she was very distressed. When he was bathing, she came in to massage his shoulders. At that time, she had a selfish motive. She wanted to do not only to help him relax his muscles and bones, she also wanted him to tell her personally, to tell her about his tiredness and what kind of trouble was bothering him. She was his wife, his only wife. He was her man, an indomitable man. When her hands landed on his smooth and muscular shoulders, she blushed unnaturally at the silky, smooth skin of his. And the man, as if he did not expect her to suddenly come in, when he saw it was her, he smiled slightly, and the tiredness on his face seemed to disappear at that moment. He closed his eyes and softly and affectionately called her, Qin. She considerately massaged his shoulders and shyly responded. After being married for so many years, he slept on the same bed with her, but he had never touched her. Most of the time, he hugged her to sleep together. Two warm bodies hugged together. They were wearing thin clothes, but he was like Lu Xiaohui. Over the years, he never crossed the line. She also thought that she was not good enough, and the man did not like her, so he did not touch her. But when she saw that there was no lack of beautiful maidservants to seduce him, and he turned a blind eye, and the maidservant was beaten, she knew that she was thinking too much. She thought that for him, it might be that he did not care about these affairs. His gentleness made her sink, and she thought that this was good. At least she could stay by his side, accompany him. But Feng Juqing was not really like that Lu Xiaohui. After all, she was a woman, and was already of marriageable age. When it came to love, it did not mean that she did not want to. She wanted to bear children for him, wanted to let herself belong to him, because she loved him. Therefore, she wanted to give everything she had to him without reservation. Occasionally, when he hugged her, he would kiss her passionately. He would kiss her, her hair, her lips, and he would kiss her passionately. Every time, at the last hurdle, he would always restrain himself. Even that shower was, her soft hands caressed the man's smooth back, feeling the stiffness of the man's body. She didn't seem to notice. She asked him with a sorrowful tone, Am I not good enough? Why don't you want to touch me? She remembered that she had said a lot, but she didn't know what it was that had triggered the flood that had been suppressed in the man's heart for many years. He suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her into the bath from the edge of the pool, holding her tightly in his arms. He kissed her passionately. His hands wandered all over her wet body, climbing up her softness, kissing her lips, devouring and nibbling. Her clothes were in a mess, and a large part of her snow-white skin was exposed in front of the man. She could clearly feel the man's arousal, and the symbol beneath him. Chapter 206. The man's kiss was rough and passionate, which was completely different from his usual gentleness. She could feel the man's big hand moving to her leg and slowly moving up. She blushed and bit her lips, not daring to open her mouth. She was afraid of making a shameful sound. She wanted to hug him back and kiss him, but Feng Jiuqing didn't give her the chance. He had been taking the initiative. And then, Shun Yueji rubbed her eyebrows. Maybe it was the temperature in the pool that made her imagination run wild, and she remembered some of the past with Feng Jiuqing. Later, when she woke up, she was already on the bed. Her wet clothes were taken off by the man, and her naked body was held in the man's arms. Some parts of her body that were kissed by him were painful, and there was also some discomfort in her lower body. She blushed and got into the man's arms. The man kissed her gently and whispered in her ear, "Don't think too much. I'm just afraid that you can't bear it. Go to sleep." She blushed shyly, buried her little face in the man's warm chest, and fell into a deep sleep. With what happened that day, the knot in her heart was untied. Although the man still rarely touched her like this, she was already satisfied. Every once in a while, Feng Jiuqing would be with her, and every time at a critical moment, she would faint. But her body gave her the feeling that he had touched her. She was just complaining that she was so useless that she could faint in this matter. And then, she became pregnant. In the past, thinking about these things, Shin Yueji narrowed her eyes and couldn't help but wonder if all this had been planned by Feng Jiuqing from the beginning. Bang! Water splashed everywhere, and the warm water hit her face, making it wet. Shin Yueji came back to her senses in an instant. She looked at the man who suddenly appeared in front of her. His white and smooth chest was exposed in front of her, and even the moment he went into the water, she clearly saw his naked body and his lower body. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. Instinctively, she hurriedly covered her body down. But damn it, she couldn't move. She stared at the uninvited guest in front of her. The handsome and cold face, the white and tender skin, appeared in the water and the thin waist. His broad chest didn't have any excess flesh. Imo Wushang's black pupils landed on the kiss mark on her neck, and a cold light flickered in his obsidian eyes. He reached out and pulled the similarly naked woman into his arms. His large palm caressed her snow-white neck, using water to wash the kiss marks on it over and over again. You bastard, get out of here." After a long time, Shun Yueji finally found her voice. Her angry voice was hoarse because of her anger. She looked coldly at the cold-faced man who was wantonly moving around her body. Imo Wushang pretended not to hear her. He saw that the kiss mark on her neck had not faded even after washing it several times. Instead, it was her delicate neck that had turned red. His cold face became even more gloomy and cold. He leaned over and buried his face in her neck. Ugh, it was a shameful murmur. Shin Yueji was angry and annoyed. She felt the man's wet and hot lips invading her neck, licking and biting it over and over again. From the beginning until now, he had not said a word, as if he was a ruler, endlessly violating her. Guards! Guards! Ugh! She was trembling with anger and shouted for help. The next moment, her lips were kissed by the man. It was a punishment, and it was a spite. Chapter 207. Shin Yueji couldn't move. Her mouth was blocked by him, so she couldn't speak. His lips invaded the beauty between her lips and teeth. Everything that belonged to her mouth was swept away. Shin Yueji was ashamed and angry. An inexplicable anger spread from her mouth. Her eyes were almost spitting fire. Apart from fire, there was also deep hatred. He was forcing her. He was forcing her again. It was him. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have been misunderstood by Feng Jiuqing. How could there be so many shameful acts? How could she go from the empress of Feng country, who was above all others, to a bitch that everyone hated and sneered at? He was the initiator. He kept saying that he loved her. He kept saying that he could give up everything for her. But in the end, he kept forcing her. Didn't he say that he loved her? Why did he turn around and leave when she needed him the most? He didn't listen to her cries, didn't see her helplessness. Why didn't he want her to lie on the bed alone, suffering the sneers and cold looks of those people in despair? Her gaze gradually became sorrowful. She was feeling sorry for herself. Why did she change her attitude towards him because of Ji Chu's words? He was the regent of Feng country. He could do whatever he wanted or didn't want. All he needed was a word and a look. He treated her well because she was obedient. When he was angry, he could also plunder and violate her wantonly. Why would he care about her feelings? People like them. Shin Yueji's heart chilled. In an instant, her body was cold like frost. The coldness that emanated from the bottom of her heart caused her pitch-black eyes to lose all light. When the man left her lips, she curled her lips and suddenly smiled. If the regent wants to see my body, I'm afraid you won't be able to. After all, this virgin body has to be given to His Majesty first. Then, it will be your turn, the regent. Her sarcastic words made the man's body suddenly stiffen. He looked at her with his dark eyes. She looked straight at him. Her eyes were full of indifference and hatred towards him. You still believe in him? He has always been hypocritical to you. He's just using you. In this world, only I treat you sincerely. Only I will never betray you. You've suffered once. Do you want to suffer a second time? Feeling the man's arms around her waist tighten, she felt a burst of pain, but she didn't frown. So what? Aren't you all the same? First, you gave this consort a candy to eat, and now you're forcing this consort. Is hitting acupoints very fun? Or did the regent like to force people? Destroy a person? Did you treat the late empress like this? There was a ball of fire in her chest. Feng Jiuqing's gentleness and affection were so real that she had no choice but to believe it. What he did today, even at that moment, made her firmly believe that he had feelings for her. There was no need for him to remind her. How much love could a person who could even take out her own child with her bare hands have? She knew, but so what? She was willing to play along with him. She wanted to personally let him taste the feeling of being deceived, betrayed, and hurt. The man's slender fingers brushed over her chest. In the next instant, he felt that his body could move again. Shin Yueji raised her hand and unceremoniously slapped the man's face. The strength of this slap was so strong that the handsome side of the man's face turned red and blood seeped out. She smiled coldly. Does the regent only know how to force people? You really make it sound nice. The so-called dignity, the so-called power, how much have you put down? In the end, aren't you still using your identity to suppress me? Forcing me? She picked up her clothes from the edge of the pool. Regardless of whether the man's gaze was on her body, she put on her clothes and left. Her thin clothes, coupled with a gust of cold wind from outside, made her feel cold. But the chill in her heart was far greater than the cold air she was feeling now. Shin Yueji suddenly felt that she was quite ridiculous. She had already experienced a betrayal. That heart-wrenching betrayal, for her, was like a nightmare. Chapter 208. She believed in his subordinate's lies and felt that he had something he couldn't say. She felt that he was a man who could be trusted. She sat on the bed for an unknown amount of time. Her body temperature slowly returned to normal. She heard a noise coming from outside. She didn't look up. She didn't know where she was looking at. The corners of her eyes were blurry, and there were hot tears welling up in her eyes. She forced herself not to shed tears, until the man came closer and the familiar aura was some distance away from her. She heard a noise. When she looked up, she saw that he was kneeling 3 steps away from her. The man was tall and his aura was as sharp as a heavenly venerable. His expression and posture made him look like an otherworldly Rakshasa. There was no extra expression on his handsome face. His dark eyes were locked on her. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Then, she saw his cold, thin lips slowly spit out 3 words. I was wrong. It was different from the previous time when he said that he was wrong. He was teasing her. This time, she could feel that when he said those 3 words, he was careful and cautious. There were also some cautious probing, fear and uneasiness, helplessness and worry. All kinds of emotions seemed to be intertwined. What shocked Shin Yueji wasn't that he apologized, but that he was kneeling to her. No one knew better than her how arrogant Imo Wushang was. When facing Feng Jiuqing, he didn't lower his arrogant and noble head. When facing the strong enemies of other countries, he didn't look at them straight in the eyes. It was such a man who didn't kneel to the ground or the sky. He was so noble, but he actually lowered himself to kneel to her. The annoyance and hatred in her heart suddenly dissipated at this moment. If it was any other man, Perhaps Shun Yueji's heart wouldn't change so quickly. But it was Imo Wushang. No one knew his dignity and nobility better than she did. He would rather die than lower his head. But even so, thinking of his brutality and coercion just now, Shun Yueji forced herself to look away from him. She didn't speak, so the man continued to kneel. She didn't know how long it had been. The man's dark eyes kept falling on her. He knelt straight and his legs didn't move at all. He just knelt on the ground and looked at her. His heart was like a tumbling wave. Shin Yueji suppressed the discomfort in her heart. She didn't want to be stared at by him all the time. She simply lifted the brocade quilt, turned over, and got on the bed, burying her head firmly in it. Even so, the man's gaze was still like a nail, staring at her from behind. No matter how tightly she buried herself, she could not ignore his intense gaze. The two of them were in a stalemate, and gradually it was late at night. Time passed slowly and stiffly. During this stalemate, Shin Yueji roughly knew that he had been kneeling for no less than 4 hours. There were no lamps in the pitch-black hall. She could only rely on the man's persistent gaze to know that he was still kneeling. She buried her whole body in the brocade quilt and poked her head out. She looked at the dark beams and said, "You can go." The man did not respond. "Do you think I want you to kneel down?" Chapter 209. Imo Wushang, don't you hate me? Since you hate me, why are you pestering me? I've already entered the palace. I just want to be the emperor's woman wholeheartedly. I don't want to think about anything else. The former empress died because of you. Do you want me to repeat the same mistake and end up like the former empress? Shin Yueji said a lot. In the end, she didn't even know what she was talking about. She twitched her lips and laughed self-deprecatingly. The high and mighty Prince Regent actually knelt down to me. What kind of reputation would I have if word got out? Do you really think that I'll be happy if you do this? Seeing that the man was still kneeling there, neither expressing his stance nor leaving, she lifted the brocade quilt and buried her head again, ignoring him. Let him kneel for as long as he wanted. She was a woman who didn't know what was good for her. She didn't believe that he could continue kneeling after she fell asleep. The sky was dusky. A little light penetrated the darkness. Perhaps it was because she was hiding something in her heart. Shun Yueji didn't wake up as usual this time. The moment she woke up, she turned to look behind her. She saw that the man was still kneeling straight, a pair of dark eyes falling on her body, not moving away at all. The faint light shone on his handsome and cold face. Half of his face still had traces of being hit by her last night. Did he really kneel for the whole night? At this moment, Shin Yueji couldn't tell what she was feeling. If Imo Wushang had knelt for a while on a whim, then this night, she slept for the whole night, and he knelt motionlessly for the whole night. Thinking of this, the flames and anger that had accumulated in her heart because of him, for some unknown reason, had suddenly and inexplicably dissipated. She stared at the man for a long time. The moment her eyes met his, there seemed to be a glimmer of joy in his dark and gloomy eyes. When she looked away, the man's eyes dimmed again. She wasn't the kind of person who didn't know what was good for her. Imo Wushang had indeed gone overboard last night, but he also realized his mistake and knelt here for the whole night. It was precisely because she knew his character and identity. Shin Yueji moved her lips, lifted the quilt, and got down from the bed. She walked up to him in 2 steps and was still 1 step away from him. She looked into his eyes and seemed to be looking down on him. Why? The man was no longer silent this time. His sharp lips moved a few times, and a hoarse voice slowly flowed out from his lips. There was determination in his hoarse voice. "My feelings for you are real." Looking at Shun Yueji's pretty little face, he spoke again. "It has never changed, and it wasn't on a whim." Then last night, Shin Yueji swallowed the rest of her words angrily. "I'm jealous." The man's 4 simple words made Shin Yueji pause. Thinking back to last night when his gaze fell on her neck, it was dark and cold with a murderous glint. From the moment he started taking liberties with her, his gaze never left her neck. His kiss was like a sharp blade, kissing and licking her neck over and over again. Chapter 210. She closed her eyes and turned her back, You can get up. Forgive me. These words made Shin Yueji laugh. Forgive you for what? We're just using each other. What's there to forgive? You can use me, but I've never used you. The man's words made Shin Yueji's heart calm. She said lightly, so what? The man was silent again. To Shin Yueji, this kind of silence was undoubtedly saying, yes, even if it's like this. So what? Seeing that the man still didn't move, she couldn't help bending down to help him up from the ground. After kneeling for an entire night, his legs, which were made of iron, had become numb. Seeing him leaning towards her, Shin Yueji didn't push him away. She just said, don't force me like this in the future. Well, Shin Yueji helped him sit on the edge of the bed. Seeing the bruises on his face, she wanted to apply some medicine to him. The man seemed to be afraid that she would leave. As soon as he saw that she was going to leave, he immediately hugged her tightly in his arms. Forgive me. I won't force you again in the future. He put his chin on her head, and his tone was careful and deliberate. Shin Yueji was moved by his cautious appearance. Shin Yueji wanted to pull his hand down, but the man held it tightly. She let the man hold her for a long time before saying, the emperor said he would take me out of the palace today. The man's body tensed. She took the opportunity to break the man's hand. I haven't been back to the general's mansion for a long time. This time I'm going back to see my father and mother. Don't make trouble. I'll go back with you. With me? Shin Yueji frowned. I'm in the same carriage with the emperor. How can you go back with me? I still say that. Don't make trouble. Forget what happened last night. If you dare to mess around again, don't blame me for not giving you a chance. Her words made the man's dark eyes light up. He hugged her tighter and buried his head in her neck. What? Her voice was annoyed. At the thought of forgiving him so easily, even her tone was indignant. I don't want to see you with him. She knew that he was uncomfortable, but Shin Yueji didn't expect him to say it so bluntly. She was silent for a moment. The man hugged her tightly, and his voice was hoarse and sullen. I feel terrible seeing you smile at him. How bad is it? Following his words, Shin Yueji continued. Imo Wushang looked into her eyes seriously. I want to kill someone. She was shocked and quickly looked away. What's the use of saying this now? In the past, when I liked you, you ignored me. Now that I have entered the palace, you say that you have me in your heart? Are all men the same? You don't know how to cherish what you can easily get, and you treat what you can't get as a treasure? The man was silent and sulking. Shin Yueji grinned. He didn't know if she was trying to provoke him or what. Did you forget what you promised me? Don't force me. Feng Jiuqing is the emperor. If he wants to do anything to me, it's not something I can refuse. The hand around her waist suddenly tightened. I won't let him touch you. His tone was sharp and murderous. Overnight, he had returned to being the high and mighty regent that everyone feared. Chapter 211. Her lips were sealed by the man again. It was not because of the man's overbearing threat last night. His kiss was extremely gentle, gently nibbling on her lips, as if he was kissing a rare treasure. Shin Yueji thought she would be angry, but damn it, she did not have the slightest bit of anger. Imo Wushang kissed her carefully, not feeling her resistance. His heart was aroused with deep joy, and he gently clasped her waist, deepening the lingering kiss. Your Highness, the Emperor ordered eunuch Gao to pass a message to you. The voice stopped abruptly again. Double Happiness blinked, looking at the two people on the bed who were reluctant to part with each other. Blinking, blinking, blinking. Last night it was the Emperor. Today it was the Prince Regent. At this moment, there was no longer any fear in her heart. There was only one thought. Your Highness has been facing two men for a day and a night. Can you bear it? Fortunately, Double Happiness was quick-witted enough. Without waiting for the two people on the bed to come back to their senses, he rushed out as if he had never been there. When Shin Yueji had a chance to catch her breath in Imo Wushang's arms, she looked back, but there was no sign of Double Happiness in the hall. She even thought that she was hallucinating. Buried in the man's arms, Shin Yueji panted heavily. You've crossed the line. In the future, you are not allowed to kiss me unless I say so. Imo Wushang's straight nose rubbed against her snow-white and sweet neck. Shin Yueji couldn't help but twitch her mouth at his shamelessness. She pulled his head out of her neck and glared at him. Did you hear that? Imo Wushang's lips curled up, and he kissed her pink little face again. I can't control myself. Shin Yueji. She was used to hearing Imo Wushang's words of love, so she felt that she was immune to it. But this sudden words of love made her feel that she had been counterattacked by him. It seemed to be saying that he couldn't control himself to kiss her, so how could he be obedient? Shin Yueji's little face turned red, and she didn't dare to look at him. If one were to say that Feng Jiuqing's kiss made her feel disgusted and embarrassed, then Imo Wushang's kiss was different from Feng Jiuqing's. Imo Wushang's kiss really made her blush. Feng Jiuqing's kiss was something she rejected. Imo Wushang's kiss caused her to sink into oblivion. She didn't want to admit it, but if it wasn't for Imo Wushang, she would have long thought of ways to make Feng Jiuqing pay attention to her and flip her card. She would use her body and methods to make him fall for her. But ever since Imo Wushang appeared, she no longer wanted to use such methods. Whenever Feng Jiuqing was flirting with her, she would deliberately avoid him. When she saw Feng Jiuqing acting like Gu Yueqin because of her, she returned to being Shin Yueji in order to prevent him from paying too much attention to her. She subconsciously clenched her fists. This wasn't a good sign. She and Imo Wushang were just using each other. No matter what kind of difficulties he had to deal with her, this time, she couldn't have too much contact with him. Other than using him, she shouldn't have any other thoughts. Thinking of this, she pushed the man away. Just now, double happiness came over. It should be Eunuch Gao sent by the Emperor to pass a message, asking me to pack my things and set off. Prince Regent, I may not be in the palace for a few days. You can go back to your Prince Regent's mansion and deal with the affairs of your mansion in these few days. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.